So we've just got one more speaker, but important speaker, Sudhindra, will be speaking about modernizing mission critical applications without stopping the bank. That's interesting. So Sudhindra, also very senior vice president of Tribe IT for a bank called Danske. Now, a bit of research is a Nordic bank with a long history. That's what I've established. But more to Sudhindra, welcome. How are you today?
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Excited to be here.
Yeah.
Trust you're doing good too.
Yes, lots of interesting topics and speakers. Now, I see that you're using the word rationalization of IT systems. So I guess that's in your profile. How does that link to modernizing mission critical?
At the end of the day, the IT systems that we have had and the ones that we want to have need to make sense.
Mm.
Rationalization is definitely one of the methods and tools to look at what to retain and what to move forward with. So that's some of the things that I will touch upon in my talk during today.
That's great. So we're all set. I can see your slides. So enjoy the session and
Thank
speak
you.
to you soon.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Excited to be here. Very quick introduction about myself. I'm Sudhindra Balaji, the global head for Danske Bank's core banking platform. I have been and I am a technologist at heart. I have been working with banks for more than 20 years now. I'm extremely passionate about working with generating business value through technology. In that comes, of course, technology modernization, working with APIs and working with cloud are definitely top of mind topics that I have been working with for the last 2 to 3 years. Of course, it goes without saying that this is all on the basis of building and retaining a high performing team that is able to work with it. So today, I would like to share some of the work that we have been doing about how do we modernize, especially core banking platforms in a large bank. We do operate in more than 12 countries, and the modernization comes along with the operating condition that we actually don't shut down everything when we go on the other side of modernization. So I would like to start off with socializing a few triggers that typically prompt someone to think about modernization in any format. Uh, uh, Organizations having legacy portfolios typically have these portfolios built over decades. That comes along with it a number of accumulated and accrued technical debt. It is evolutionary architecture in nature in terms of how the systems have evolved. And then maybe it's also for banks or organizations which have acquired other organizations. There are systems merged through different companies. So this creates quite a bit of impedance and friction in how systems can or cannot efficiently work together. Then there is, of course, the increasing challenge on cost of maintaining the IT portfolio in terms of cost of change, and also extremely long delivery times if we don't optimize and also rationalize in some cases these application portfolios that are there. It also causes increased operational risk, not only from a technology perspective, but also from a people perspective. Technology nowadays is extremely fast moving in terms of options and efficiency that it can give. So if we are not able to keep up, that is definitely a problem where one day we might actually find nobody is interested to continue to work with the older technologies that we have. And then in the end, of course, it significantly restricts our ability to quickly react to what our customers expect from us and also what the business expects. And those definitely have an impact on bottom line over a period of time. So what we did with our team here is we looked at the why, the what, and the how, and what should be a done state when we talk about modernizing core banking. There are definitely on the why key business drivers in terms of being able to quickly efficiently and securely launch new features towards our customers. There are technology drivers which push us to make sure that in the ecosystem that we operate in, both internal for a core banking application and also the external fintechs, third-party providers, etc., we are also able to talk to them on the technology that is considered to be standard in the industry. And people and competence also forms a key driver for us to start looking at using technologies that are more sustainable. So while we scoped the parts of which parts of core banking as an application portfolio we should modernize, we looked at a risk value based approach for workloads. So the idea was not to simply take the entire core banking and say, okay, now all of it will be available in a modernized state on cloud. It was to take a look at the ones that created the most value and that carried the most operational risk. And then we also had different choices for modernization that we took. In some cases, it made a lot of sense for us to go with, let's say, a SaaS solution. In many of the other cases, we took API enablement and cloud adoption as the modernization route. And that will be something that I will double click on. And then what was also important on the how part was that we anchored the modernization efforts so that it could produce continuous business value incrementally. And it was not a big bang where we took 5 years out and then out came a new core banking application. Some of the realities that we socialized and did as expectation setting in the end was about the done state, which is we were always clear to state that there will always be a period of coexistence with the modernized application suite and then the legacy application that existed. So it was not necessarily for all workloads that we would not be on the legacy platforms. What was also important when we started working with API enabling core banking was to make sure that we also stopped further technical debt from accruing, which means we actively stopped developing on the legacy portfolio. We made sure that APIs were the default and the de facto way and standard for integration for applications. And then, as I said, it was important for us to say that this is a journey for using APIs as an enabler for modernization. So we would get to different stages of the done state, however, incrementally. There are a few things about the design and implementation choices we used. Predominantly, I talk about business applications that we ran on mainframe. And then they had typically a characteristic of poorly managed separation of concerns, which basically talks to the fact that over a period of time, a lot of the logic, business rules, etc., that may not really belong to a core banking portfolio had somehow seeped in. So one of the things that we were very conscious of is in a modernized state, all of these needs to be cleaned up. And then also on the people competency side, it was very important for us to make sure that the developers we had on mainframe, the business analysts who knew the portfolio and the rules very well, we could also take them along in the modernization journey. On the implementation approaches, of course, we had a choice of public and private cloud. We are on both there, and that gives us the necessity for preparing for hybrid coexistence, both on the people side and in the technology side. And then it was also important for us in a coexistence phase to make sure that we focused on data integrity, because applications in the coexistence stage exist both on the data and the business logic side in different platforms. And then it was also important that there was functional integrity, especially for core banking applications, since it is considered system of records. So there are no duplicating functions which produce different outputs. Domain-driven design was a key cornerstone for us to start looking at how do we slice and dice core banking as a portfolio, for us to look at what should be modernized how in terms of separating workloads. In this, it was also very important that we took an outside in view to make sure that the APIs that we produced, the microservices that we produced, the functionality that we gave out and the data we gave out was actually recognizable and consumable from a self-service perspective from our consumers outside. And then, of course, it was also important for us to make sure that we infused necessary business and technical competence in the teams. And that started with providing or hiring cloud native engineers to use that as a catalyst for us to improve our technical competence, but also at the same time make sure that we brought our subject matter experts both on systems and business functionality along the journey. Uh, and this is where it also gets a little bit technical. We basically used a three-phased approach to API enabling and moving to cloud, the core banking platform that we have. Of course, depending on different workloads, maybe one or two phases can be skipped, but this is more or less how we had our journey. Phase one was all about introducing a distributed read. Of course, this is a text slide depicting how, on the left-hand side, the mainframe, the master data store on mainframe and the application portfolio interacted on the right-hand side, where we started building critical mass of microservices and data in the cloud platform. What is important to recognize here is the idea here was never to do a one-to-one mapping of taking data out of legacy platform to cloud. DDD was our governing factor here to make sure that we identified the right domains, the right bounded context, and the right data models for us to move to cloud. And then there was, of course, for a coexistence phase, a mapping element between the two. So what we got out at the end of this phase was our ability to give out APIs that our internal and external consumers could use to consume our data and functionality. The APIs interacted with the data on the new data model on cloud. However, the master was still on mainframe. So this gave us the ability to actually start decoupling the integrations from mainframe, so we could progressively also stop accrued technical debt. Phase two was all about being able to strangle the integrations on mainframe by being able to shift master data handling to cloud. But again, we were very conscious of the fact that uh, we still have a lot of consumers still consuming our data and functionality on mainframe, and that is again a characteristic of a core banking application. However, what this stage definitely gave us was to be able to establish further critical mass of business rules functionality that handle data updates on cloud. So all the aspects that come about with efficiencies when you have applications on cloud in terms of microservices, in terms of CI/CD pipelines, in terms of test automation, etc. This is when we started gaining advantages from those. And the third phase, which we are not there yet, is for us to be able to completely cut out the dependencies with the legacy applications that we have, and of course we are still going on this journey. But the idea here is again for those workloads where we chose bespoke microservice development in-house with a new data model, it was important for us to end it at this done state. Some of the key things both phase two and phase three give us is not only the APIs, the RESTful APIs that we have internally for people to consume our data and services, but also we used, of course, the same setup to be able to both stream data and issue domain events. And that is a huge benefit, especially for channels, for example, to be able to consume data at core banking with not a very highly coupled dependency with core banking. It also addresses a lot of application design patterns where we are able to, the consumers are able to consume data where there is a requirement for the data transfers to have very, very low latency. So this is more or less a very high level view of the three-phased approach we used in being able to move out our core banking application portfolio from mainframe to a cloud setup. Here is one other deep tech call graph view of how the entire API tech stack looked at. Basically, what you see above the red line are the various layers of how both get and post endpoints on APIs that started off encapsulating data and functionality on mainframe look. So that is what the top part says, and the bottom part talks about the existing portfolio that we have. The reason, in my view, this diagram here becomes very important is because whatever you see below the red line, they are common functionality and data that has to maintain data and functionality integrity through the entire coexistence phase. You will notice here in the middle that there are web service endpoints, there are file channels, there are batch channels, and then there are legacy messaging services, etc. So they have all historically been consuming common data and functionality on mainframe. So it was necessary for us to be able to draw this virtual line where above which we had the cloud and the API and the event and the streaming logic, and below which we maintained consistency of application and data. Over a period of time in phase 3, of course, the elements below the red line would naturally disappear because that's the decommissioning part. But until the coexistence phase is there, this principle was very key for us to be able to succeed in the modernization effort, and once again, not to disrupt business more than what was necessary. So a little bit about what we did in terms of key API standards that were in play during the coexistence phase. It was always our intention to make sure that the APIs were available on a standard API developer portal through domain-driven design. It was very important for us to make sure that discoverability of APIs and the ability for people to understand the contents of the APIs was as self-serviced as possible. Of course, we followed all the REST events and gRPC standards when we did implement the APIs themselves. Then on the production and the consumption part, some of the standards that definitely played out was to maintain simplicity of API payloads. And this goes back to one of the things that we fixed with quite a bit of effort to make sure that all the historical complexities that went on in the legacy application portfolios, they were not carried forward with the API payloads. So typically, if we would have, let's say, 20 or 30 input parameters to call a mainframe module, we did not carry those forward. We used GTD and API best practices to make sure that those were simplified. What was also important for us is for those who have experience with mainframe, you would know that the security aspects in terms of authentication and authorization is different from an implementation perspective on mainframe, and it is also different from cloud. So it was also necessary for us to maintain consistency that no matter how a consumer accessed us, if either through a RESTful interface or consumed our events or through a mainframe module, the application of authorization checks and authentication remained consistent. So that was something that we actively worked with. And of course, with a cloud setup, DevOps and CI/CD pipelines come in naturally. The other thing that was also very important for us was to focus on consistent error handling to make sure that uh, people, when they also started consuming our APIs and also on mainframe, they were able to recognize the outputs that we gave in a consistent manner. So there was no overloading on their part on business logic. And of course, the test automation and observability paths were key for us to make sure that we provided a resilient setup on cloud. So I just want to a little bit summarize through this journey what we have learned. Establishing drivers for modernization is, of course, very, very fundamental for expectation management. That is because we don't treat it necessarily only as a technology investment, but want to make sure that business stakeholders come along the way for them to recognize the value that we are producing when we have APIs out of core banking and when we modernize it to cloud. Number two, APIs definitely are key for us to in the modernization effort. But what is equally important is that all the backend data and functionality that the APIs encapsulate, they are cleaned up. Otherwise, it becomes very tricky for us to provide an efficient setup in the end on cloud, because we still have to handle all the accrued technical debt that was there on mainframe. So that is definitely that we actively cleaned up. The third one, of course, is very important that we have a clear API adoption strategy. It was not just enough for us to produce the APIs, but also make sure that we went and socialized the adoption of those APIs. We have had exponential growth internally in terms of our API consumption, and that is a little bit of an evidence that the APIs are meaningful and they're also giving us the necessary efficiencies we actually put our bets on. And then, of course, as I said, the end game for us was to make sure that we just left the bank with one core banking portfolio, and then thereby decommissioning the legacy services. And then I have, of course, talked about the people part who we brought along here, and then delivering business values in increments. So that was a little bit what I wanted to share on my experiences. So Jonathan, I don't know if you have some concluding remarks and maybe a few questions that I could try and answer.
Okay, thanks, Sudhindra. The main thing is thank you very much for, in 20 minutes, explaining what must have taken quite a long time to do. So there are some
Yeah.
questions. I'll just bring it to the focus, as we have a few minutes. So Hasham has brought up the point: is it really possible to fully modernize the stack, considering most companies modernize by building a layer on top of the legacy, even after
Yes.
the completion? So I know you did speak to this around strangle some of the processes. So that would be
Yes.
one question. And that also ties to the other question from Rudolph is, do mainframes provide the API interface? So in other words, for the services that you did keep, did you have an API? So
Ah.
really
Okay.
two questions,
Okay.
different
Sure.
people. Mm.
Sure. The answer is yes, we believe it is possible to have a fully modernized stack, but there are some operating conditions around it. One, as I said, it is important for us to maintain relevant and sustained investment until we get to the done state. So bringing business along is very important. And as I also pointed out, it was a conscious decision on our part not to allow a lipstick on the pig approach, which is we do not leave it just by encapsulating what we have on mainframe. So that definitely requires persistence for us to actually move out of that. So it takes effort and it takes conscious focus for us to be able to get out of that. And as I said, API was one of the mechanisms for us to modernize. The other one was also to look at workloads to completely move out and get into a SaaS-based solution. But at all points in time, it has always been our stand that we don't want to leave the bank with dual systems, one on legacy and one on cloud. So we do intend to clean up.
Okay.
Um, so
Sudhindra,
that's how, yeah,
I hate to interrupt, mid question. I think what we can do is we can take this through on the chat after the session.
sure,
So we have to finish on time. We're going to be restarting this session at 1:10 p.m. India time. So pardon me for interrupting you. I would love to hear
no
more
worries.
about that and more about the agile journey. But anyway, thank you very much, Sudhindra. We can
Thank you
keep
for having me.
online answering the questions there.
Thank you
Everyone
for having
else,
me.
thank you so much for attending.